Marcus Bennett had seen some messed up stuff during his 15 years as a paramedic in downtown Detroit, but nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared him for what went down that Tuesday morning in September. The day started normal enough, the usual grind, coffee tasting like dirt, traffic backed up for miles, people honking their horns like it'd actually make a difference. Marcus was pulling a double shift at Detroit General, completely wiped out from dealing with a 3-car pileup the night before, when the first call came through the radio around 6:30 a.m. Dispatch said something about a disturbance at the Greyhound station, folks acting crazy, biting people, the whole 9 yards. Marcus and his partner, a rookie named Tommy Fitzgerald who'd only been on the job 3 months, figured it was just another drug situation, maybe bath salts or some new synthetic garbage hitting the streets. They rolled up to the station, lights flashing, and man, the scene was absolutely bonkers. There were maybe 20, 30 people scattered around the parking lot, some running, some screaming, and others just standing there looking confused as hell. Marcus grabbed his kit and hopped out, immediately spotting a security guard slumped against the wall, blood staining his uniform shirt. Tommy went pale, looking like he might lose his breakfast right there on the pavement, but Marcus had been around the block enough times to keep his cool. He rushed over to the guard, a big dude named Calvin who Marcus actually knew from previous calls to the station. Calvin's eyes were all glassy, unfocused, and he had this nasty bite mark on his forearm that looked infected already, the skin around it turning this weird grayish-purple color that Marcus had never seen before in all his years of medical work. "Calvin, buddy, can you hear me?" Marcus asked, checking the guy's pulse. It was there but weird, too slow, and kind of irregular. Calvin's head lolled to the side, and he let out this low groan that didn't sound right, didn't sound human really. Tommy came up behind Marcus, radio in hand, calling for police backup because the situation was clearly bigger than just a medical emergency. That's when Marcus noticed the woman stumbling toward them from the station entrance, her movements all jerky and wrong, like a puppet with tangled strings. Her business suit was torn, there was blood on her mouth, and her eyes had that same glassy, dead look that Calvin had. She opened her mouth and made this horrible moaning sound, then started moving faster, heading straight for Tommy. "Hey, ma'am, we're here to help you," Tommy called out, because the kid was still green, still thought everyone could be reasoned with. Marcus knew better though, his gut telling him something was seriously off about this whole situation. He stepped in front of Tommy just as the woman lunged, her hands reaching out with fingers curled into claws. Marcus caught her wrists, and holy hell, she was strong, way stronger than a middle-aged office worker should be. She snapped her teeth at him, actually trying to bite his face, and Marcus had to use all his strength to push her back. That's when the security guard, Calvin, suddenly lurched to his feet behind them, moving with that same jerky, unnatural motion. Tommy spun around, eyes wide as dinner plates, and started backing up toward the ambulance. "Marcus, man, what the hell is going on?" Tommy's voice cracked, fear making him sound even younger than his 23 years. Marcus didn't have an answer because this was beyond anything in his training, beyond anything that made sense. He shoved the woman away hard enough that she stumbled backward, then grabbed Tommy's arm and pulled him toward the ambulance. More people were coming out of the station now, maybe a dozen of them, all moving with that same creepy, jerky shuffle, all moaning and reaching out with grabbing hands. The few normal people still in the area were screaming, running for their cars, complete pandemonium breaking out in real time. Marcus and Tommy made it back to the ambulance, slamming the doors shut just as the crowd of infected people surrounded the vehicle, their hands slapping and clawing at the windows. "Drive, drive, drive," Marcus shouted, and Tommy didn't need to be told twice. He threw the ambulance in reverse, backing up so fast he nearly clipped a parked car, then peeled out of the parking lot with the tires squealing. Marcus grabbed the radio, trying to raise dispatch, trying to warn them that something major was going down, but the airwaves were already clogged with similar reports coming from all over the city. Incidents at the subway station, at a shopping mall, at an elementary school, the calls just kept coming and coming. Marcus felt this cold dread settling in his stomach because if this was happening everywhere at once, then Detroit was in serious trouble, the kind of trouble that made normal emergencies look like a walk in the park. Meanwhile, across town in the financial district, Jessica Rodriguez was having the worst Monday morning meeting of her entire career, and that was saying something considering she worked as an investment banker where terrible meetings were basically part of the job description. She was sitting in a conference room on the 42nd floor of the Renaissance Center, listening to her boss, Mr. Harrison, drone on about quarterly projections, when her phone started buzzing like crazy. Jessica tried to ignore it, knowing Harrison hated interruptions, but the buzzing wouldn't stop, message after message lighting up her screen. Finally, she snuck a glance under the table and felt her heart drop when she saw 15 missed calls from her sister, Maria, and a bunch of text messages that just said call me now and get out of downtown and something's wrong. Jessica's hand shot up, interrupting Harrison mid-sentence, which was basically career suicide in normal circumstances. "I'm sorry, Mr. Harrison, but I need to take this, it's a family emergency." She didn't wait for permission, just grabbed her phone and walked out of the conference room, ignoring the annoyed looks from her coworkers. She called Maria back, and her sister picked up on the first ring, her voice high and panicked. "Jess, oh thank God, you need to get out of that building right now, the whole city's going crazy. There are these people attacking everyone, biting them, and the news is saying to stay inside, but I don't think inside is safe either." "Maria, slow down, what are you talking about?" Jessica was walking toward the windows now, looking down at the streets below. From 42 stories up, everything looked normal, the usual flow of traffic and pedestrians going about their business. But then she noticed a disturbance near Hart Plaza, a crowd forming, people running. Even from this height, she could tell something wasn't right about the way some of those people were moving. "Turn on the news, any channel," Maria insisted, so Jessica pulled up a news stream on her phone, and her blood ran cold. Every major network was covering what they were calling mass hysteria events happening simultaneously across Detroit and several other major cities. The footage showed people attacking others, the victims convulsing and then getting back up and joining the attackers, spreading whatever this was like wildfire through crowds. Jessica's banking career suddenly seemed real unimportant compared to staying alive. She ran back to the conference room, bursting through the door and interrupting Harrison again. "We need to evacuate the building right now, there's some kind of attack happening in the city." Most of her coworkers looked at her like she'd lost her mind, but a few people pulled out their phones and started checking the news, their faces going pale as they saw the same footage Jessica had seen. Harrison was pissed, his face turning red as he started to tell Jessica she was fired, but then the building's emergency alarm system kicked on, and an automated voice instructed everyone to proceed to the stairwells in an orderly fashion. That got everyone's attention real quick, and suddenly the conference room was chaos, people grabbing their stuff and rushing for the exits. Jessica went with the flow, getting swept up in the crowd of office workers flooding into the stairwells. 42 flights of stairs down, every floor adding more people to the mix, everyone pushing and shoving, panic starting to override common sense. Jessica kept her phone out, trying to stay connected with Maria, who'd made it to their parents' house in the suburbs and was barricading the doors. "Just get out of the city, Jess, please," Maria kept saying, her voice cutting in and out as the cell network got overloaded. By the time Jessica made it down to the 20th floor, the crowd had slowed to a crawl, people backing up, some kind of hold up below. Then the screaming started, echoing up the concrete stairwell, and Jessica felt that same cold dread that Marcus had felt earlier because she just knew, that whatever was happening on the streets had made it inside the building. People started pushing back up the stairs, fighting against the crowd still coming down, creating this dangerous crush of bodies in the narrow stairwell. Jessica got slammed against the railing, the metal biting into her ribs, and she could hear someone shouting about the lobby being overrun, about those things getting into the building through the main entrance. She made a split-second decision, pushing her way out of the stairwell and onto the 19th floor, figuring she'd try a different route down or at least find a place to wait this out until help arrived. The 19th floor was mostly empty, everyone having already evacuated, office doors standing open, computers left running, coffee still steaming in mugs. It was eerie, like everyone had just vanished in the middle of their workday. Jessica made her way to the windows, looking down again, and this time there was no denying that downtown Detroit had become a war zone. Fires were burning in several locations, smoke rising into the morning sky. The streets were packed with people running in every direction, and she could see those things, those infected people, chasing and catching the normal folks, dragging them down. Police cars and ambulances were everywhere, their lights flashing, but they seemed overwhelmed, unable to contain whatever this outbreak was. Jessica pulled out her phone, hands shaking, and called Maria again. "I can't get out, the lobby's blocked, these things are in the building." She tried to keep her voice steady, tried not to let the panic take over. "Find somewhere safe and hide, Jess, somewhere they can't get to you. Lock the doors, barricade yourself in, and wait for the military or whoever to come fix this mess." Back on the streets, Marcus and Tommy had made it maybe 6 blocks from the Greyhound station before hitting gridlock traffic, cars abandoned in the middle of the road, some still running with the drivers just gone. The radio chatter had gone from organized emergency response to complete chaos, dispatchers overwhelmed with calls, first responders reporting situations they had no idea how to handle. Marcus made the call to abandon the ambulance, grabbing the medical kit and a road flare, telling Tommy they needed to get off the streets and find shelter. They headed for a pawn shop that Marcus knew had good security bars on the windows, the owner a guy named Ray who Marcus had treated once for a heart scare. The shop's door was unlocked, which was weird because Ray was paranoid about security, and when they got inside, they found out why. Ray was sitting behind the counter, but he wasn't the same friendly, gruff old-timer Marcus remembered. His skin had that grayish tint, his eyes were milky and unfocused, and there was a massive bite wound on his neck that should have killed him from blood loss alone. Ray's head turned toward them when they entered, moving way too far, like his neck bones had gone all loose. Then he stood up, knocking over the stool he'd been sitting on, and let out that low, horrible moan that Marcus was starting to recognize as the sound these things made. Tommy raised his hands, backing toward the door. "Ray, Mr. Patterson, it's us, it's Marcus and Tommy from the ambulance service." But Ray didn't care, didn't recognize them, just started moving around the counter with his arms outstretched, his mouth hanging open, dried blood on his chin. Marcus grabbed a baseball bat from a display rack, feeling sick about what he was going to have to do but knowing there was no choice. "Tommy, get behind me." Ray lurched forward, faster than Marcus expected, and Marcus swung the bat, catching the old man in the shoulder and knocking him sideways into a display case. Glass shattered everywhere, and Ray went down, but he was already trying to get back up, the injury not even slowing him down. They don't feel pain, Marcus realized out loud, his mind racing through the implications. Whatever this infection is, it shuts down pain receptors, maybe shuts down everything except basic motor functions and aggression. Tommy had grabbed a pistol from the gun case behind the counter, his hands shaking so bad he could barely hold it. "Can I shoot him? Is that legal? I mean, he's already dead, right?" Marcus didn't know the legal answer, didn't know if laws even mattered anymore when the whole city was falling apart. But he knew Ray Patterson wasn't coming back from whatever this infection had done to him. "Aim for the head," Marcus said, remembering every zombie movie he'd ever watched and praying that Hollywood had gotten at least that part right. Tommy fired twice, the sound deafening in the enclosed space, and Ray dropped like a puppet with cut strings, finally still. Both men stood there breathing hard, trying to process what they'd just done. What they'd had to do. Then Marcus moved into action, pushing a heavy shelf in front of the door, telling Tommy to check the back entrance and make sure it was secured. They were gonna hole up here, wait for this situation to get handled by people with more firepower and better training than a couple of paramedics. But as the hours crawled by and the situation outside didn't improve, it became clear that nobody was coming to save anyone. The TV in the pawn shop showed news coverage that got progressively worse, reporters struggling to maintain professional composure as they described scenes of absolute mayhem. The governor declared a state of emergency, the National Guard was being mobilized, but it all seemed too little too late. The infection, whatever it was, spread like crazy, every victim becoming a new threat within minutes of being bitten. Marcus watched the footage and tried to make sense of it from a medical standpoint, but nothing added up. The incubation period was way too fast, the transformation too complete, and the violence too coordinated, like something was overriding the victims' brains and replacing their consciousness with pure predatory instinct. Jessica, still trapped on the 19th floor of the Renaissance Center, had found a law office with solid doors and had barricaded herself inside with 3 other people who'd had the same idea, a janitor named Deshawn, a security guard named Patricia, and a young intern named Kyle who looked like he might pass out from fear at any second. They'd pushed filing cabinets and desks against the doors and were taking turns watching the hallway through the door's small window. The stairwell had gone quiet, which was somehow worse than when there'd been screaming, because it meant those things were either gone or waiting, and nobody wanted to open the door to find out which. Patricia, who'd been working security in the building for 12 years, had her service weapon drawn and kept mumbling about how this wasn't in the training manual, how nobody prepared you for the dead getting back up and attacking people. Deshawn was the calmest of the group, maybe because he'd grown up in Detroit's roughest neighborhoods and had seen enough violence that even this didn't completely shake him. He'd found some vending machine snacks in the office break room and was rationing them out, figuring they might be stuck here for a while. "My cousin's with the guard," Deshawn said, trying to sound hopeful. "They'll roll in with tanks and sort this mess out, just gotta stay alive until then." Kyle, the intern, was on his phone, reading social media posts from across the city and across the country. "It's not just Detroit," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's happening in Chicago, Cleveland, New York, Los Angeles, everywhere all at once. People are saying it's terrorists, or a biological weapon, or the actual apocalypse." Jessica felt her stomach drop because if this was nationwide, then the cavalry might not be coming at all. The military would be spread thin, trying to contain outbreaks in multiple cities simultaneously, and Detroit might end up having to save itself. She moved to the window, looking out at the city she'd lived in her whole life, watching it tear itself apart. Smoke from fires had created this haze over downtown, and the strange shadow the news had mentioned, the one that seemed to have appeared right before the infection started, still hung in the sky like a dark cloud that wouldn't move despite the wind. Some people online were saying the shadow was connected to the outbreak, that it had appeared in every affected city right before things went sideways, but that seemed too weird, too science fiction to be real. As night fell, the city went dark in patches, power grids failing or being shut down deliberately. The Renaissance Center had backup generators, so Jessica and her group still had lights, but looking out at the darkened city was terrifying, fires providing the only illumination in some areas. The sounds floating up from the streets had changed too, less screaming, more of those awful moans, which meant the infected were starting to outnumber the survivors. Patricia suggested they try to make it to the parking garage, get a car, and drive out of the city, but Deshawn shot that down, pointing out that the streets were probably impassable and they'd be better off staying put in their secure position. Jessica agreed with Deshawn, remembering her disaster preparedness training from college, the rule about staying where you are until you have a solid plan and a safe destination. Marcus and Tommy, still holed up in the pawn shop, were having similar debates about whether to stay or go. The shop had proven to be a solid fortress, the security bars keeping out the infected that occasionally wandered by, but their supplies were limited, just some bottled water and candy bars they'd found in Ray's mini fridge. Marcus had been monitoring the emergency channels on a police scanner, listening to the last scattered reports from first responders who were still out there trying to help. Most of the messages were desperate calls for backup that went unanswered, or warnings about certain areas being completely overrun. Then, around 10 p.m., a new voice came over the scanner, calm and authoritative, identifying itself as Colonel Hayes from the National Guard. "All emergency personnel and civilians monitoring this frequency, this is Colonel Hayes broadcasting from the Detroit Arsenal. We have established a safe zone at the old Ford plant in Dearborn. If you can make it there, we have shelter, supplies, and armed protection. The route north on I-75 is still partially clear, but avoid downtown and the east side completely, those areas are lost. Repeat, the Ford plant in Dearborn is a designated safe zone. Make your way there if possible, but do not attempt travel after dark, these things are more active at night. The message repeated on a loop, and Marcus felt a surge of hope mixed with dread because Dearborn was at least 10 miles away, and getting there would mean crossing a whole lot of dangerous ground. Tommy wanted to leave immediately, antsy from being cooped up and terrified of still being in the city when their supplies ran out. But Marcus, older and more cautious, wanted to wait until dawn, give themselves the best chance of making it through. They compromised, deciding to prep during the night and leave at first light. Marcus raided the pawn shop's inventory, grabbing a couple of hunting knives, a crossbow with bolts, and two-way radios. Tommy loaded up on ammunition for the pistol and found a shotgun that Ray had kept under the counter. Neither of them were gun enthusiasts, but desperate times and all that. They also grabbed backpacks and filled them with whatever supplies might be useful, flashlights, batteries, a first aid kit that was way better than the one from the ambulance, some rope, and even a couple of those emergency rain ponchos. While they prepped, Marcus couldn't stop thinking about the shadow Colonel Hayes had mentioned in a follow-up broadcast, describing it as an unidentified atmospheric phenomenon that appeared approximately 1 hour before the first outbreak incidents. The military didn't know what it was, where it came from, or if it was connected to the infection, but the timing was too perfect to be coincidence. Marcus had seen the shadow himself, right before the call to the Greyhound station, this weird darkening of the sky that didn't look like regular clouds, more like reality itself had developed a bruise. Some of the chatter on the scanner, from civilians and first responders alike, speculated about everything from alien invasion to government experiments gone wrong, but nobody had real answers, just theories and fear. Jessica and her group on the 19th floor heard the same broadcast from Colonel Hayes, Patricia picking it up on her security radio. The message sparked an intense debate, with Kyle insisting they should try for it, that staying in the building was just waiting to die slowly when their food and water ran out. Deshawn pointed out that none of them had cars that could handle the ruined streets, and trying to go on foot was suicide. Jessica found herself playing mediator, suggesting they wait until morning and then reassess, see if the situation improved or if more evacuation routes opened up. Patricia backed her up, her security training emphasizing the danger of making rash decisions in crisis situations. They voted 3-1 in favor of staying put through the night, with Kyle outvoted but clearly unhappy about it. To pass the time and keep their minds off the horror outside, they started sharing their stories, how they'd ended up trapped together in a law office during the apocalypse. Patricia talked about her 2 kids, both in college out of state, and how she couldn't reach them, didn't know if they were safe or if this infection had spread to their cities too. Deshawn talked about his grandmother who'd raised him, who lived in senior housing on the east side, the area Colonel Hayes had said was completely lost. Kyle, once he stopped panicking, revealed he'd only taken the internship to impress his dad, who was a big-shot lawyer, and now he'd probably never get to tell his dad that he'd actually wanted to be a teacher, not a lawyer. Jessica shared about her sister Maria, hopefully safe in the suburbs, and about how she'd spent so much of her life chasing success and money that she'd forgotten to actually live, to take chances and appreciate what mattered. It was weird, this moment of human connection in the middle of catastrophe, but it helped. It reminded them what they were surviving for, the people and dreams waiting on the other side of this nightmare. Around midnight, the building shook slightly, a deep rumbling that came from below. Patricia went to the window and cursed under her breath. "They're bombing the bridges," she said, and sure enough, in the distance they could see explosions lighting up the night where the bridge to Canada crossed the Detroit River. They're trying to contain the outbreak, keep it from spreading across the border. The implications were heavy because if the military was already resorting to destroying infrastructure, then things were way worse than anyone was admitting on the official channels. Marcus and Tommy felt the same explosions from the pawn shop, the whole building rattling, dust falling from the ceiling. Tommy had been trying to sleep, curled up on the floor with a jacket for a pillow, but he sat up fast, eyes wide. "What was that, bombs?" Marcus nodded grimly, understanding the strategic thinking but hating what it meant for everyone still trapped in the containment zone. They were on their own, cut off from escape routes, stuck in a city that was quickly becoming a massive tomb. The scanner chatter confirmed it, other bridges and major roads being destroyed or barricaded by the military, checkpoints established to keep the infected from spreading to surrounding communities. Anyone who tried to leave the city was being turned back or, if they showed signs of infection, shot on sight. Sleep didn't come easy for anyone that night, the constant background noise of moans and occasional screams keeping everyone on edge. Jessica dozed off around 3 a.m., her body finally overriding her fear with exhaustion, but her dreams were nightmares, images of her sister being attacked, of her own reflection showing those milky dead eyes. She woke up around 5, the sky just starting to lighten, and found Deshaun awake too, sitting by the window and keeping watch. "You see that?" he asked, pointing at the shadow that still hung over the city. In the pre-dawn light, it was more visible, and Jessica could see it wasn't a normal cloud formation, it had this almost geometric quality to it, like a massive dark shape hovering in the upper atmosphere. "What do you think it is?" Jessica asked, and Deshaun shrugged. "My grandmother, before she passed, she used to tell stories about signs and portents, warnings from above when something big was gonna happen. Maybe this is like that, or maybe it's just some weird weather thing and we're looking for meaning where there isn't any." He paused, then added, "Either way, it gives me the creeps, like something's watching us, studying us." Jessica felt the same way, couldn't shake the feeling that the shadow was somehow alive, aware, and that the zombie outbreak was either its doing or its purpose. But that line of thinking led to dark places, to possibilities that were worse than just a disease or bioweapon, so she pushed it aside and focused on practical matters like checking their barricade and rationing out breakfast from their limited supplies. Marcus and Tommy were up with the dawn too, both of them exhausted but running on adrenaline and determination. They geared up, strapping on the weapons and supplies they'd gathered, looking like some post-apocalyptic survivalist duo. Marcus did a final check of the route to Dearborn using an old paper map he'd found, since cell service and GPS were unreliable at best. The most direct path would take them through some rough neighborhoods even in normal times, but the alternative routes added hours to the journey and passed through areas that the scanner reported as heavily infested. Sometimes the straight shot was the only shot, even if it was dangerous as hell. They moved the shelf blocking the door as quietly as possible, not wanting to attract attention from any infected in the area. The street outside was trashed, abandoned cars, broken glass, trash and debris everywhere, and ominously, bodies lying in the road. Some of the bodies were clearly dead, finished, but others might have been infected playing possum or whatever the zombie equivalent was, so Marcus and Tommy gave all of them a wide berth. The morning air smelled like smoke and something worse, something rotting, and the only sounds were distant moans and the occasional gunshot echoing from blocks away. They moved quickly but carefully, staying close to buildings where they could duck into doorways if a group of infected appeared. 3 blocks from the pawn shop, they encountered their first real obstacle, a pack of maybe 8 infected crowded around something in the middle of an intersection, probably a victim though Marcus didn't look too close. The infected were doing that swaying, moaning thing, and Marcus made the call to backtrack and go around rather than try to fight through. Noise attracted them, he'd noticed, so staying quiet and avoiding contact was the best strategy. They detoured through an alley, climbing over a chain-link fence into a parking lot, then cutting through what used to be a convenience store, its windows smashed and inventory looted. Somebody had spray-painted "No help coming" on the wall in big red letters, a sentiment that was hard to argue with given everything they'd seen. Back at the Renaissance Center, Jessica's group had decided to make their move, the situation in the building deteriorating as more infected seemed to be gathering on the lower floors. Kyle had been checking the stairwell periodically and reported that the infected had figured out how to climb stairs, slowly but surely making their way up level by level. It was only a matter of time before they reached the 19th floor, and the group decided they'd rather take their chances trying for the safe zone than wait to be cornered with no escape route. Patricia took point, her weapon drawn, with Deshaun right behind her carrying a fire axe they'd pulled from an emergency case. Jessica and Kyle were in the middle, both armed with makeshift weapons, Jessica with a letter opener that seemed pathetically inadequate but was better than nothing. They made it down to the 15th floor before running into infected, 3 of them stumbling around the landing, their business attire shredded and stained. Patricia didn't hesitate, firing 3 precise shots that dropped all 3 infected before they could even register the group's presence. The sound of gunfire echoed in the stairwell, and almost immediately they could hear moans responding from both above and below, the noise attracting every infected in the building. "Move, move, move!" Patricia shouted, and they ran, taking the stairs 2 at a time, trying to outpace the converging horde. Jessica's lungs burned, her legs screaming in protest, but fear kept her moving, Kyle right behind her breathing hard and whimpering. They burst out of the stairwell on the ground floor, into the main lobby, and froze because there had to be 50 infected in there, maybe more, all turning toward the sound of the door slamming open. Deshawn grabbed Jessica and pulled her sideways, heading for a service corridor that employees used, Patricia and Kyle following close behind. The infected surged after them, that slow shuffling walk turning into something faster, not quite running but definitely not slow either. The group sprinted down the corridor, Deshawn leading them through the building's guts, past maintenance rooms and storage areas, until they hit an exit door that led to the parking structure. They crashed through it, Patricia slamming it shut behind them and looking for something to block it with. The parking structure was dark, the backup generators apparently not covering this area, and the group had to use flashlights to navigate between the cars. They could hear the infected pounding on the door they'd just come through, the sound of splintering would indicating it wouldn't hold long. Jessica spotted a car with its windows down and doors unlocked, a old but sturdy-looking pickup truck, and on a desperate whim checked the visor. Bingo! Keys fell into her hand, and she shouted for everyone to get in. Deshawn took the driver's seat, being the only one who'd driven a stick shift before, and after a heart-stopping moment of grinding gears, he got the truck started and rolling toward the exit ramp. They almost made it out clean, but a group of infected wandered into their path on the 3rd-level ramp, and Deshawn had to make a choice, stop and risk getting swarmed, or plow through. He chose to plow through, the truck's heavy frame knocking infected aside like bowling pins, the thuds making everyone in the cab flinch. Then they were out, bursting from the parking structure into the smoky morning light, tires squealing as Deshawn wrestled the truck onto the street. The city looked even worse than it had from 19 floors up, entire blocks burning, crashed cars and overturned emergency vehicles creating obstacle courses, and infected everywhere, literally everywhere, in the streets and on the sidewalks and even hanging out of broken windows. Marcus and Tommy had covered maybe 2 miles, exhaustingly slow progress through a nightmare landscape, when they heard the truck's engine roaring down a parallel street. Marcus made a split-second decision, stepping out into the intersection and waving his arms, hoping whoever was driving was friendly and not just fleeing in blind panic. The truck swerved toward them, and for a second Marcus thought he'd made a fatal mistake, but then it skidded to a stop and a woman leaned out the passenger window. "You guys trying to get to Dearborn?" Jessica shouted, and Marcus nodded. "Get in the back, quick!" Marcus and Tommy didn't need to be told twice, vaulting over the tailgate into the truck bed as Deshawn hit the gas again. Now they were 6, strangers united by survival, racing through the ruined city toward a promised safe zone that might or might not actually be safe. Deshawn drove like a man possessed, weaving between obstacles, sometimes going up on sidewalks to get around blocked sections of road. Jessica filled Marcus in on who they were and how they'd escaped the Renaissance Center, while Marcus shared what he and Tommy had learned about the infected, their apparent weakness to headshots and their attraction to noise. Patricia, listening from the cab, suggested they try to stay quiet and avoid drawing more attention than the truck's engine already was, advice that made sense but was hard to follow when Deshawn had to honk the horn to scare infected out of their path. They were crossing over the Lodge Freeway when they saw the military checkpoint, concrete barriers and armored vehicles blocking the road, soldiers in full combat gear manning positions behind sandbag walls. Deshawn slowed the truck, not wanting to get shot by jumpy guardsmen, and stopped about 50 yards out. A soldier with a megaphone ordered them to exit the vehicle with their hands visible and approach slowly. The group complied, all of them exhausted and terrified and hopeful that they'd finally reached safety. The soldiers checked them over, looking for bite marks or signs of infection, asking questions about where they'd come from and what they'd seen. Satisfied that the group was clean, the lead soldier, a sergeant named Williams, lowered his weapon and offered them water from a cooler. "The safe zone's another 2 miles up the road," Williams said, pointing north. "We'll radio ahead, let them know you're coming. But I gotta warn you, it's crowded as hell, supplies are limited, and we're getting more refugees than we can handle. It's safe from the infected, but it ain't exactly comfortable." Marcus didn't care about comfortable, he just wanted walls between himself and the nightmare they'd been living through. The group piled back into the truck, Deshawn driving more slowly now, following the soldiers' directions toward the Ford plant. As they got closer, they could see other survivors, people walking in small groups, families with kids, elderly folks being helped along by younger relatives, all converging on the promised sanctuary. The Ford plant had been converted into a fortress, chain-link fences topped with razor wire surrounding the property, guard towers with soldiers keeping watch, and a steady stream of people being processed through a checkpoint at the main gate. The group joined the line, waiting their turn, watching as each person or family was screened, registered, and directed to different areas of the complex based on their needs and skills. When they finally got to the front, a tired-looking National Guard officer took their information, assigned them ID numbers, and explained the rules: no weapons except for authorized security personnel, mandatory health checks every 12 hours, work assignments based on skills and abilities to help maintain the safe zone, and absolutely no unauthorized exits. Jessica felt weird surrendering the letter opener she'd been clutching like a lifeline, but she understood the logic: couldn't have thousands of scared, traumatized people armed in close quarters without risking violence breaking out. They were directed to Section C, a warehouse space that had been converted into communal housing, cots lined up in rows with just enough space between them for privacy. The group claimed spots near each other, not wanting to split up after everything they'd been through together. Deshawn immediately crashed on his cot, exhaustion winning out over the noise and activity around them. Patricia went to find her kids' names on a survivor registry that volunteers were maintaining, hoping against hope they'd somehow made it to this safe zone or another. Marcus and Tommy checked in with the medical team, offering their skills as paramedics to help with the wounded and sick. The doctor in charge, an older woman named Dr. Ellis, looked like she hadn't slept in days but nearly cried with relief at having 2 more trained medical personnel. "We've got triage set up in Building 6, she explained, leading them through the complex. Mostly injuries from people fleeing the city, some infected bites that we're monitoring real close. Nobody's turned here yet. We've been lucky, or the incubation period is longer than we thought, but we're ready to quarantine anyone who shows symptoms." Building 6 was organized chaos, the wounded lying on cots or sitting in chairs while a small team of nurses and volunteers tried to handle everything. Marcus jumped right in, his training taking over, assessing a woman with a badly twisted ankle and setting up a splint. Tommy worked alongside him, cleaning and bandaging a kid's road rash from a bike accident during the evacuation. It felt good to be doing something useful, to be helping instead of just running and hiding. But even as they worked, Marcus couldn't stop thinking about the shadows still hanging over Detroit, visible even from Dearborn, and about what had caused this outbreak in the first place. Jessica, meanwhile, had been assigned to the communications team, her banking background apparently translating to organizational skills that the safe zone desperately needed. She helped coordinate supply inventories, tracked incoming refugees against the available space, and monitored radio broadcasts from other safe zones across the country. The picture that emerged was grim. The infection had hit every major metropolitan area simultaneously, overwhelming emergency services and spreading faster than containment efforts could manage. Some cities had established successful safe zones like Detroit's, others had fallen completely, and a few were still fighting street by street to reclaim their territory. The federal government was trying to coordinate a national response, but with infrastructure damaged and communication spotty, it was mostly local authorities and military units making decisions on the fly. Kyle found his place with the supply runners, younger guys who volunteered to make trips to nearby stores and warehouses to scavenge food, medicine, and other necessities. It was dangerous work, venturing outside the safe zone's walls, but Kyle seemed to find purpose in it, maybe trying to prove to himself that he was braver than he'd thought. His first run was scheduled for the next day, a trip to a pharmacy 3 blocks away that supposedly hadn't been completely looted yet. Deshawn, once he woke up, joined the security team, his size and street-smart attitude making him a natural fit for keeping order and manning the walls. That first night in the safe zone, Jessica lay on her cot listening to hundreds of people breathing, coughing, crying, praying, and trying to sleep. She thought about Maria, still hopefully safe in the suburbs, and about the life she'd had just 48 hours ago that seemed like a distant dream now. The shadow was out there, looming over the ruins of Detroit, and nobody knew what it meant or if it would ever go away. Rumors circulated through the safe zone, whispered conversations about government conspiracies, alien invasions, biblical prophecies, and scientific experiments gone wrong. Jessica didn't know what to believe, but she knew that humanity had been knocked down hard, and the real test would be whether they could get back up, could rebuild from this catastrophe. Colonel Hayes made his rounds through the safe zone that night, stopping to talk with refugees, offering words of encouragement and reassurance that didn't quite reach his eyes. When he passed through Section C, Jessica worked up the courage to approach him, asking the question that had been eating at her. "Colonel, what caused this? What's the shadow?" Hayes looked at her for a long moment, seeming to weigh how much to share, then sighed. "Honestly, we don't know. It appeared in the upper atmosphere about an hour before the first infections were reported, simultaneous across multiple cities. Satellite imaging shows it's not a weather pattern, it's not debris or pollution, and it doesn't behave according to any known physical laws. Some scientists think it's extraterrestrial, others think it's a dimensional anomaly, and the pessimists think it's the end of the world. All I know for sure is that people started getting sick right after it showed up, and until we figure out what it is and how to get rid of it, we're stuck dealing with the consequences." The answer wasn't comforting, but Jessica appreciated the honesty. She returned to her cot, her mind racing with possibilities. If the shadow was extraterrestrial or extra-dimensional, then the infected weren't just sick people, they were something else entirely, maybe hosts for whatever force or entity the shadow represented. That thought was terrifying on a whole new level because it meant humanity wasn't just fighting a disease, they were fighting an invasion, and they didn't even know the enemy's true nature or objectives. She eventually fell into a fitful sleep, dreaming of shadows and shambling figures in cities consumed by darkness. Marcus worked through the night in Building 6, treating a steady stream of patients, everything from minor injuries to serious infections from untreated wounds. Around 3 a.m., a commotion near the quarantine area drew his attention. One of the patients who'd been bitten had started showing symptoms, the telltale grayish skin tone and unfocused eyes. The medical team moved fast, sedating the patient and securing him to a bed with restraints before the transformation could complete. Marcus watched through the observation window as the patient's vital signs changed, heart rate dropping, body temperature falling, brain activity diminishing to almost nothing except in the primitive areas that controlled movement and aggression. It was like watching someone die and be replaced by a biological robot programmed only to attack and spread the infection. Dr. Ellis stood beside Marcus, her expression grim. "We've run every test we can with the equipment we have, and it doesn't match any known pathogen. The infection targets the cerebral cortex, essentially destroying higher brain function while leaving the brainstem intact. The victim dies, by any medical definition, but the body keeps moving, driven by some external signal we can't detect." She paused, then added quietly, "Some of the researchers think the shadow is broadcasting that signal, controlling the infected like puppets. If that's true, then we're not dealing with zombies in the traditional sense. We're dealing with remote-controlled biological weapons." The implications made Marcus feel sick because if the infected were being controlled, then they could potentially be coordinated, strategic, and far more dangerous than mindless shuffling corpses. As if summoning his fears into reality, alarms started blaring throughout the safe zone, the loudspeakers crackling to life with urgent warnings. "All personnel to defensive positions. We have a massive horde approaching from the southeast, estimated 500 plus infected, this is not a drill." Marcus ran for the windows, looking out toward the perimeter, and his blood ran cold. The infected were coming, not in scattered groups but in a massive wave, moving with unified purpose toward the safe zone's walls. This wasn't random wandering, this was an organized attack, and it meant everything was about to get much, much worse. The soldiers on the walls opened fire, the chatter of automatic weapons filling the night air, but the horde just kept coming, climbing over the bodies of the fallen infected, pressing against the fence with collective weight and determination. Jessica, jolted awake by the alarms, grabbed her emergency pack and ran for the designated shelter area, joining hundreds of other terrified refugees. Deshaun was up on the walls with the defenders, using a hunting rifle he'd been issued, picking off infected that got too close to the fence line. Patricia was helping evacuate children and elderly to the interior buildings, her security training kicking in automatically. Kyle and the other supply runners were being armed and positioned as a second line of defense in case the perimeter was breached. Tommy found Marcus in Building 6 and together they started preparing for casualties, setting up additional triage areas and laying out medical supplies. The battle raged for what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes, the defenders slowly whittling down the horde's numbers, bodies piling up outside the fence creating a gruesome barrier. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the attack stopped, the remaining infected turning and shambling away as if receiving new orders. The defenders didn't lower their weapons, waiting to see if it was a trick, but the infected kept going, disappearing back into the ruins of Detroit. Colonel Hayes was on the radio immediately, contacting other safe zones, and the reports that came back confirmed Marcus and Dr. Ellis's worst fears. Every safe zone had been hit simultaneously by coordinated attacks, all starting at exactly 3 a.m., all ending at the same time. The infected were being controlled, and whatever intelligence was behind the shadow had just demonstrated it could direct its forces with precision and timing. The message was clear: humanity's safe zones weren't safe, they were just temporary refuges that could be overrun whenever the shadow decided to commit enough resources. As dawn broke over the Ford plant, the survivors gathered in the main yard for an emergency assembly. Colonel Hayes stood on a makeshift platform, his uniform dirty and a bandage on his arm from a close call during the battle. His voice was tired but firm as he addressed the crowd. What we face tonight proves that we're up against something bigger and smarter than we initially thought. The infected aren't just mindless victims of a disease, they're weapons in a war we don't fully understand yet. But here's what I know about the human race: we're stubborn, we're adaptable, and we don't go down without one hell of a fight. We're gonna strengthen these defenses, we're gonna keep searching for answers about that shadow and how to stop it, and we're gonna survive this, one day at a time if that's what it takes. The speech wasn't fancy, but it struck a chord with the exhausted, traumatized survivors. They'd made it through the night, through the coordinated attack, and they were still standing. Marcus felt a grim determination settling over him, replacing the fear and confusion. Whatever the shadow was, wherever it came from, it had picked a fight with humanity, and humanity had a long history of punching above its weight class. They'd figure out the mysteries behind the infection, they'd find the shadow's weaknesses, and they'd take back their world, no matter how long it took or how hard the fight became. Jessica found her group from the Renaissance Center, all of them tired but alive, and felt a surge of gratitude that they'd stuck together, that they'd all made it to this temporary sanctuary. They were strangers 48 hours ago, but now they were a family forged in fire and fear, bonded by shared trauma and survival. Whatever came next, whatever challenges the shadow and its infected army threw at them, they'd face it together, along with the hundreds of other survivors who'd refused to give up, refused to let humanity's story end with a strange shadow and a mysterious plague. The sun rose higher, burning away some of the smoke haze, and the shadow above Detroit seemed to pulse slightly, as if aware it was being watched and studied, as if preparing for the next phase of whatever plan it had initiated. The battle for humanity's survival had only just begun, and while the outcome was far from certain, one thing was clear: the human spirit, battered and tested as it was, remained unbroken, ready to face whatever horrors the day ahead might bring.